Welcome to the Ohio Arts Council's Rife Gallery programming series for our current show, In Touch, curated by Megan Young. Today, we are thrilled to present the artist, Britny Wainwright. As a brief reminder, everyone tuning in today is in listen-only mode, so please feel free to use that chat function and ask questions. We'll be sure to get to them at the end of the talk. Also, please keep in mind that because we're presenting from separate locations, there may be some variations of bandwidth. So if one of us freezes up or the sound fluctuates, thanks in advance for bearing with us. All right, thanks everyone, and welcome, Britny.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for coming, and thanks to the Rife Gallery crew for having me, and for Megan Young for curating me into this show. I'm going to start my talk as I always do, where I go way back into my childhood. So this is me on the left with my cousins lined up next to me on my grandmother's couch. I include this image in my talk for a few reasons. First and foremost, that a lot of my work has to do with women's work. And my grandmother was the one who taught me how to do a lot of things, especially with sewing. And that we're all sitting on this very lovely, ugly couch. And I'm obsessed with the couches. That'll come up again later. So my talk will be based around these three questions. Why do I work in ceramics and fiber? How do I engage with feminism and art history in my practice? And finally, looking forward, how is my practice expanding? So I like to think of material as a medium to get my ideas out into the world. But even though I work in multiple materials, I still have had to learn how to work with those materials. And one of my favorite readings that I return to is by Annie Albers. It's a transcript. And she's talking about material as metaphor. That material is something that actually informs us how it wants to be used and how it can best speak. And we learn from it by spending tactile time with it. I also like this transcript because I believe that material brings meaning into the work, and to strengthen the concept of artwork, being intentional with materials that you choose makes a lot of sense. So I started working in ceramics in my undergraduate education. This is from graduate school. These are pieces that went into my thesis. I like that ceramics can be tiny and it can be massive. There's a lot of failure with ceramics. It is difficult. It is a process of heat and transformation, and things can go wrong. And that loss of preciousness has informed my approach to making. I make a lot of things and I curate out and I think about things in numbers together. So these pieces on the left were loaded out of the kiln. You can see there was some breaking that happens. When I make things big, these are like 3 feet, or when I make things small, like the small leaves on the right-hand side, there's always a loss that occurs in the process. I've been incorporating fiber into my work now for a number of years. I consider fiber to be really my first medium. It's the thing I learned how to do as a kid. I messed around with fabric that my grandmother gave me. I was making clothes for my dolls. I was making things. I'm really drawn to the softness and quickness of stitching. But almost always I combine the two, softness and hard, ceramic and fiber, squishy and squishy. The clay becomes less squishy when it's fired, but they both are squishy at some point. And I have also realized that these materials that I like working in are also gendered. They're tied to craft. And when I was reading Judy Chicago's book, Through the Flower, My Struggle as a Woman Artist, she talks about in graduate school how her male counterparts were working with metal, with machinery, with tools, things that she had not been trained in college. But yet her peers had this knowledge already from helping their dad fix cars, from working around the house. And she said that she leaned further into exploring that side of materials, industrial male materials, But also I think of her dinner party piece where she used ceramics and embroidery and textiles. And I like to lean on the things that I was trained in, either in formal ways or informal, the things that I find intuitive. Um, a large thing that has impacted my work is the idea of how women historically, and of course, not all women, but the idea of recreational making, of knitting, of cross stitch, of curling up on in the armchair watching TV while making something. And often the something that was being made was for someone. There's an act of love, of care, of making socks or fixing or patching a shirt. These productive means of fun and the real like slow cumulative process of it. How do I engage with feminism and art history in my practice? So these, if you don't know, are called tulipiers. They are a ceramic form that came out of, they started popping up in the 16th century. They were made specifically for tulips. And the image on the left is a piece from my undergraduate show, my senior show. I was drawn to making these forms because of the engineering feat of building something that could stack and hold water. But traditionally, the taller your tulipier, the more wealth that you had. And this is because of these tulips, these pink and white striped tulips called or caused an economic bubble called tulip mania. And the tulip bulb itself became so sought after that it would be worth an entire estate. So I've heard. And so we see this mimicry of these tulips. It was the tulip bulb, but also the tulip flower, and it was the representation of this tulip. So paintings or drawings of the tulip. The reason these were so precious is that the bulb was exposed to a virus causing this mosaic pattern in the petals, and you couldn't recreate it. Falling into this small piece of history that combined both flowers and this special ceramic form really caught my attention of how motifs travel across time. So all of these images have some sort of tulip in them, but they're from many different places in the world and many different times. And it is said that in Europe, the tulip motif actually came to them first through textiles and ceramics, other representations of the tulip way before the flower actually came to Europe. The tulip is from Turkey. And so there was a misunderstanding. I read a book that said that people mistook the representation of a tulip for a thistle. And this traveling of motif across time, across culture, across material or medium has also happened in my work. I'm going to go back to the last slide really quick. So my interest in researching particular flowers and their meanings and their traveling across time and place has led me to track my own history of motif across time and place and material. And so this top line I refer to as my cloud flowers. They keep changing. They appear in my work from time to time, from cutting them out of clay slabs and firing them to painting them onto brick, to stitching them out of flannel, to then again cutting them out of clay slabs. And the bottom, those are leaves that have changed from shape to line to this coil drawing in space to a filler. This brings me to my obsession with the ugly couch. So I love the movie Juno. I just had to include this image in my presentation because Juno steals this whole living room set from somebody, so from somebody's curbside and puts it onto someone else's lawn. The ugly couch, I mean, that's subjective, right? Not everyone's going to agree that one couch is ugly. But what I mean by this, it's endearing. And I mean, when couches are home goods, have motifs on them that we know very little about. So this couch on the left has tulip-like motifs, maybe some pomegranates, some other things are very stylized and abstracted. I can see ties to Asian ceramics in that, but also Middle Eastern ceramics. And it reminds me of this obsession with the tulip and how it moved across time. On the right, we have an illustration from a flower book where things were recorded, things from all over the world. And it was false. It was not a reality. It was this garden in peak bloom, but not all of those things would be in bloom in the same place at the same time. And it makes me think about how interior design and womanhood and domestic space, making the home choice is involved, but it's very limited. There's some things that are put out there for us to consume. We have a very slim choice, actually. But it also comes into play a role with personal identity, how we create our interior spaces, the aesthetic choices that we make, this really funky orange, burnt orange wallpaper and carpet. There's something that's just satisfying to me in this. And I think about the women who created their identity around their spaces through this limited choice. So this show from 2021 was in Birmingham, Alabama at Vinegar Contemporary. It's called Couched. It was really our first kind of break out of COVID, and I wanted to put a couch in the gallery. I covered it in this couch slip cover that was digital print of my ceramic leaves. People were invited to sit on the couch and talk. Couches were something that we had become very familiar with during COVID, and our interior are safe, our home spaces. But now this was in the public space, in the gallery. Even though the gallery is public, I do think about it as something that's in between. It's public, but it's also kind of private. Museums, I think, are good examples of where I feel alone together. There's a togetherness there. I know there's other people, but I'm often experiencing interactions with works alone. Also included in this exhibition were these wall works of vinyl and ceramic. This piece sat across, so I'm going to go back for a second. So the couch, if you're sitting on the couch looking at the other wall, these two round pillows slouched against the wall. And it was meant to mimic how our flesh sinks and bulges on our skeletons when we sink into furniture, when we are comfortable. This is vinyl filled with terracotta ceramic leaves with plastic snaps. I was having fun with material play, using things that I hadn't before. This vinyl, the amber color of it feels dated. It feels old. It looks kind of crunchy. It also reads as sterile sometimes, like medical supplies, things wrapped in plastic. These are the wall works. So I made several of these. They're kind of garments hanging on hangers, or travel bags, or purses, or pockets, or shirts. The interiors filled with these soft but hard ceramic leaves piling on top of each other. It's like hair. It's like we can see through the cushion to something that we shouldn't be able to see. More of these. This one entitled Bib has more fringe, snaps, like a shirt. This was also included in this exhibition. A ceramic made out of brick clay, terracotta, a hanger that mounted to the wall, and then this quilt type shape was pulled through. The edges of the quilt were stuffed with flannel scraps. Painting has also been a significant part of my research and of my work, and it keeps coming back. So on the right is a picture of a piece that I made my junior year of college. I was still obsessed with pattern then and collecting it and recreating it. I was looking at a lot of Art Deco textiles. The image on the left is my studio in 2018. I was thinking of painting pattern on surfaces that could move, that could fold or wrinkle or be stuffed, compared to how I had been using ceramic before, where it was very stiff and flat. But the reason I kind of always have painting in the background of my mind is painting's place in the art world. So painting for a while now has been on the top of the art world. And of course, it's always changing, but mid 20th century painting was king. And often it was abstract expressionism that was pointed to as kind of the new method. Action is painting, let paintings be about paint. I dove into that history a bit because I wanted to place myself in relationship to that context. I honestly was tired of always being asked why clay. I wanted to know what that hierarchy was. And so, like, I often think of Jackson Pollock or Willem de Kooning as part of the ABEX movement, but this is Helen Frankenthaler, and I love her work. The way that the paint slowly creeps across canvas through capillary action, how color and pooling is present in the work. And I think of all these women who were not celebrated as much as their male counterparts in the time that they were making. And on the right is a picture of a piece that I made that did have painted elements in it, but it was also a quilt and hung up in the gallery. And I love how paint can mark time, a freezing of time, a drying, but that's the same as clay. A twist of clay can be forever set into stone by firing. It can be recorded. My fingerprints are left behind on everything. This piece, which there was a detail of in the last slide, was the first time that I tried to make clay act like fiber. And so all of these tassels or fringe that you see along the edges are made out of terracotta. So it's a coil that I roll out and I twist and I fire, and they're really delicate before they get fired, but they're actually quite strong once they are fired. But they're heavy on these edges. This piece is entitled Heavy Edges. And I'm using fiber, but I'm using ceramic for the thing that fiber would perhaps do better than clay. I'm making a copycat. I'm mimicking. I'm asking it to do something it doesn't readily want to do. This was a show that was just outside of DC in Maryland called Bedclothes. And there's the two quilts hanging over the window, in front of the window, and the heavy edges on the wall over there. And this bench type thing in the middle that was not meant to be sit upon. It's too crooked, it's too low, it's embellished in breakable terracotta. How ceramic can act like fabric or clothing or trim, and vice versa. For the opening for the show, I was lucky enough to collaborate with a group of dancers that were in residence at Viz Arts, where this show was. So I got to work with them. We did a workshop. They wanted to interact with the work in some way, dance around it. And so for the opening, they activated the space around the work, dancing. You can see all the viewers here as well. And they asked me what they should wear. I got to choose, which I thought was very cool. And I was like, I really like it if you dressed in color, because that felt appropriate for the work that I had made. The color was so saturated and so bright, so fun. And I'm really happy that I had this experience to work with them. The idea of home, the idea of decoration, embellishment, that was another thing that I've researched back into history as to why I felt always like I had to explain myself when I was putting ornamentation on something, embellishing or decorating. It feels like it was frowned upon in a serious art world. And I found this article from 1903, or this essay rather, by Aldo Fluce. He was an architect and interior designer, and he was very anti anything embellished. What's funny is this picture on the right is the bedroom that he designed for his wife at the time. And I would say, like, yes, it's more minimal than most interiors in 1903, but it's quite maximal to me. This shag rug, this like thick, heavy comforter, all of these curtains around. And so Aldous Luce wrote this thing called Ornament and Crime, and he equates patterning, decoration, embellishment to barbarianism, to anti-human progress. He was writing this during a time of great industrial growth. And he also pretty much says that instinct to cover something and embellishment is feminine and therefore bad. I like found the thing that explained why I had to always feel like I couldn't really put pattern on things I really wanted to. And like, why did that seem not as serious next to other things that acted more masculine? And I also found magazines from this time, or scholarly articles written about these magazines, about women were encouraged to dress in ways that blended in or camouflaged into their interior spaces. I think of women as installation artists in the home, arranging space, arranging objects, arranging how the aesthetics of the space you're in impact how you feel, the spiritual, safe, vulnerable home. And if women were meant to camouflage themselves into the space, just think of how strange it was for women to go out into the masculine public, into industrial spaces that were not meant for women. It was alienating to be anything else besides this domestic being. This is a statement that I developed during graduate school, and I still come back to it from time to time. Uncomfortable with decoration being excluded as a medium of power, I employ floral pattern in an assertive way to rewrite modernism's hierarchy. I am an unsatisfied accomplice. With painting, with decoration, with craft materials, I've done a lot of thinking into where they have stood in art history and why I want to use them. It goes back to my material choices and the baggage that it brings. Goes back to one of my first slides where I choose the materials and what I do with intention. So while I was researching all of that and coming up with that statement, this was my MFA thesis show. And I arranged it in a way I wanted it to feel like a space in its own, a garden. There's things that imply walls or furniture, but there's also these organic forms, how pattern exists on a plane, but then can bend, using bricks that are construction material. They're strong. You can build buildings out of them, and wood, and this bright orange color that was also like the terracotta clay that I was using. How pattern can change between surfaces, how it can be stacked up, how glaze can come into play. I don't really use glaze that much in my practice right now, recently, but I was all about it. It was how I could paint onto form, how I could make magic happen in the kilns. For these larger blobby bush-like, plant-like slab forms, I often would work from, and still do, work from drawings. I plan it out, even if it's a tiny, tiny little sketch that becomes this large thing. I do that so that I've already made a good portion of my decisions before I even touch clay. Because clay takes time. These are built in layers of slabs stacked on top of each other. And by the time I get to the top, the bottom is almost dry. It takes patience. If I allow myself to change my mind as I'm going, it ends up in something that doesn't quite reach the vision. And so even small drawings, I always work from a drawing. It's how I plan out my ideas. It gives also the challenge of figuring out what's on the other side of that piece. This work was made directly after graduate school. It was a reconfiguration, a new iteration of a piece that was in my thesis. This is Enduring Blossom. It's an upholstered form that's pretty much as tall as I am. I think I can just like barely see over it. This work was included in an exhibition called The Beyond, Georgia O'Keeffe and Contemporary Art. I was alongside, I believe there was 20 contemporary artists. I think it was 20. And then several dozen works by Georgia O'Keeffe. I'm like, what a wonderful honor to show alongside a powerhouse woman from 20th century painting, of all things. And the exhibition was arranged into different segments reflecting her work over the years. I was both alongside her flower paintings, which I think is what we might think of with Georgia O'Keeffe, but also in the section where she painted figures. And so this image on the right is of me and another contemporary artist, but there was more paintings of hers of the human form. And so to build this thing, like what is something that I'm getting more into? I have little training. But it's one of those things, if you want to do it, you figure out how to do it. And the second time around, when I built this piece, I made it better. So plywood silhouette covered in egg carton foam, and then upholstered with, I like to use canvas or duck cloth because it's strong, and stapling it on, stitching on fired ceramic floral slabs. I use embroidery floss or sometimes waxed like thread or string. I find that works a little bit better because the edges of the fired ceramic are quite sharp. And with jostling of shipping and moving and just time, sometimes it can wear down on the embroidery floss. And so the waxed thread really works well. And then finally, finishing the edge of things. It's very couch-like, but vertical. An installation I made in 2019 was called Power, and it was a show that I had at an artist residency. I spent a month there. The show was up, and then I made new work in the room next to it. But this gallery had these really awesome closed doorways that were very symmetrical. And at the time, I was thinking about power and architecture, and often symmetry is used to assign power to an institution in buildings. We had just gone through a time where we were staring at empty TV screens waiting for a political figure to show up. And I wanted to recreate that, but in hot pink. Like if Lisa Frank could make a flag and put it into a space, what would it look like? And we put a bunch of light onto this and it filled the room with pink. You could see it out into the hallway. It was quite amazing. It was intense, but also soft. It was funny. I think humor is important in my work. But still, I want to point out the little fringe on the flag. Fringe keeps coming back in the work. So looking forward, how is my practice expanding? So this work was made for the Terrain Biennial in 2021. If you don't know what that is, it happens across many cities across the world. I think the base is in Chicago, but I could be wrong. Neighborhoods volunteer to have artwork, contemporary artists come and install stuff in front of their house, and it stays up for like a month or so. And it's usually in the fall, so the weather is changing. I was assigned this house, which I thought was perfect. And I put these fake flower boxes in their front yard. And the idea of the house and belonging and how it ages is interesting. And I read this book by Leonora Carrington, who's also a surrealist painter. And she just talks, there's a character in the book where she's an elderly woman. She's being sent away to a retirement community, and she's living with her son before that. And she's like, how can I leave this house that feels such a part of my body, that feels like it's another organ that is creaking like my own bones? I found that part of that book to really speak to me, and to really just put language to something that I feel, like the objects that I associate with my home or with my foremothers really matter to me. They feel like they're part of me. And so this piece lived in this front yard, and when we went to collect it, there was leaves all over it. I thought that was great. The colors stayed saturated, even though the rest of the grass, the leaves had all changed and fallen. The grass had gone brown. This body of work, so that was shown at Roy G. Biv here in Columbus, similar, familiar. This piece on the right is the work that's in the In Touch exhibition. So this body of work was more on this idea of home, abstracting familiar objects, playing with material, playing with color. This is plastic chain that's holding the piece up in the middle. It's like a hand towel hanging in the middle of space, or a shawl. There's ceramic fringe on it. There's stitched on cloud flowers made out of coils. This work is the one that's in the up at the Rife Gallery right now, pockets and other places to hide. It's quite large. You can stand behind it. How I see this is like a hiding place, a changing booth, a screen to get behind, a window. The green corduroy pocket on the left-hand side is like pant pockets, but it's large. It's like a window box. It really makes you want to reach in and pull out one of those ceramic flowers that's on the inside. There's a see-through curtain above it that's not really doing much to add privacy. And on the right is a cushion, a mattress that's also like a painting. It's appliqued green flowers on a mauve background. Masking and unmasking space. You can walk around it. You can see other artworks through it. With the In Touch exhibition and talking with Megan about why she wanted to include this work, I think the show and all the other art that's in it has something to do with that disconnect or that togetherness that happened during COVID, and continues too, this like falling out of touch or being in touch in different ways. And this screen, while there is a lot of physical tactile touch that went into making it, and my fingerprints are in these flowers, it's also a way of separating space, of kind of claiming territory as well. Another piece from this series, she's got a head for it, is like a floral arrangement on a table, but it's also like a bathing cap or a head presented on a platter. The work, this series in particular, also had a darkness to it. Even though there was humor, it was also underlying with a little bit of darkness. And probably as a result of when I made this work too. Sorry we couldn't make it as an arrangement, a tableau, a vignette of almost a domestic space, a side table next to the door, wilting flowers, a coat closet, a sandbag. It's all this strange arrangement. It has ceramic fringe on it. The black canvas was painted and then stitched on with color. The sandbag is something that's quilted and stuffed with sand, and it's holding the piece in place. A collaboration I did with Pittsburgh-based artist Carolina Alamia is pattern play. This was up at Gallery 934 here in Columbus a couple summers ago, 2 summers ago, 2022. She and I have been fans of each other's work and became friends because we were in a show together a couple years ago, but we wanted to collaborate. So she also works in ceramics, but also fiber, and makes some video pieces. And for this show, we combined these ceramic floral elements we had both been using in our own way. And she scanned and made this digital printed wallpaper for the gallery. And then I made this extended faux floral box for the gallery. And 934 faces the sidewalk. There's a lot of foot traffic through there, and it feels very storefront-like. We wanted to activate that space and kind of trap this fake stage prop of a flower box inside of the space. Any of the white clay that you see is porcelain, and that was made by Carolina. And I stuck to my terracotta, and we've been putting those two colors together. Again, you may notice my love of sandbags. I did make some special sandbags that had fringe on them for this piece to hold the work up. Some more recent works, these I refer to as vessel cushions, and I've been making a series of these for 2 or 3 years. Unglazed ceramic terracotta vessels, that will often have some sort of patterning on them, but not through glaze, through texture, through adding coils, smearing things, cutting into things, roughing up the surface. Often motifs that I've used before in different ways. The quilt in a more traditional sense has come into my work. I'm looking at traditional quilt blocks, but I'm using materials like upholstery, velvet, and velour, and really scratchy materials, things that would not normally be used for a normal comforting quilt. This piece has tulips on it. They came back into the work, and it has these ceramic knots, which actually are on the piece that's up at Rife now. These tied teeny tiny little coils of clay that I've knotted on themselves and fired and then stitched onto the edge. I'm painting in this piece. I'm using acrylic paint, and cushions and slouching. This piece entitled Green, because of its color, reminds me of a tombstone, a stone carving, like things that would be found in a graveyard, like the carvings, the ornamentation on things. For these vessel cushions, I'm going to go a little bit into how I've made them. This piece called Impatiens was based on these impatiens flowers that I kept walking past day after day over here on the left. And pairing different fabrics, building them up, stitching them down, cutting out the profile of the clay vessel, and then stitching it together. So this piece was in an exhibition last year in the fall, in Washington, Pennsylvania. And this was a partner show with painter Hannah Parrott. We're very good friends and had a lot of overlap in the things we were thinking about and wanted to show together. And so I made several pieces and she made several pieces to speak to one another. So on the left is that finished Impatiens piece. On the right is a work that I based I was working with auto vinyl. I order strange things off of eBay. So I'm sure whoever sent it to me thought I was like refinishing like a boat seat or something, but really I was making this. It's slightly stretchy. It's often shiny. You can get different finishes. Some of it's metallic. It's quite thin and easy to work with. And it felt like a diner seat, like a booth or a car seat, something that was not velvet plush couch-like. But the quilt block that I pulled from for this is called the Dresden Plate, which is a quilt block, and I abstracted it some, but it's a quilt block based on ceramic plates that were made in Dresden, Germany. And so this like layering of history and where things come from, like a quilt block that's based off of ceramics, that's totally my jam. This was made about a year ago for an exhibition I curated of ceramic artists who also play with other materials. This is called Denim and Posies, and I worked with a quilt block that's called, I think it's just called the bow tie, like bow tie quilt block. And so usually it's used for quilts made for men. I was using denim, and then I was superimposing this floral decaying imagery onto it. And also, I'm convinced that terracotta pretty much just it goes with any color. Like that blue of the denim really makes the orange sing and vice versa, but I can put it with pretty much anything and it looks slightly different. This piece is an overlapping in my last few bodies of work. This is a wall piece. It's quite large. It's 54 inches tall. Mixed fiber. I painted on it. I'm using these half square triangle quilt blocks to put together to play with color theory and how light would work. But then also there's these very real, it's not just a painting or a floral painting, but there's these very real, like plopped on there half vessels that are breaking our expectations of perspective and space. From my solo exhibition that was this past September. This was up at the Lima OSU campus, which has this wonderful little gallery with these shiny black floors. It was so cool. I made a series of these vessel cushions and revisited some old works. Thinking particularly about the lifespan of the garden and how things grow. I was also tending to a garden last summer, but how things grow and how they come into blossom and then how they decay. And if they do that again, or if it's a one and done kind of situation, but the colors and how the scale of the garden shifts so much over the course of the season. And so these works, I was being really specific about color and wanting it to feel cohesive as a body of work, but also featuring a different point of life for flowers. This piece in the front of the picture here is called Poppies, and it was based on poppies that were in my front yard last summer. There were these beautiful dark burgundy purple flowers that were very fringy, but they would grow up as a seed, like this bulb into the air, bloom, wilt, and become this gorgeous seed pod that would just disperse these poppy seeds everywhere a couple months later. And that brings me to my final slide. So this is the work that's up at the Rife Gallery. Here's my contact information where you can find more about my work, but I'd be very happy to answer questions.
Excellent. So folks, if you have questions, go ahead and pop them into the Q&A and I will give them to Britny. We have a couple of questions from Panayota. You mentioned that some of your earlier ceramics, which were made for your BFA thesis show, curious around what the concept or theme of that thesis was.
So yeah, that's a great question. I'd made all vases. So I made several of the tulipières and I also made flower bricks. I thought that both of those were interesting ceramic objects that were meant to sustain the life of a flower, but for only so long. I have sometimes referred to vases as flower zoos. We like cut flowers and bring them in for our own enjoyment, which I participate in and I love that. But like the idea of a vase is to try to sustain this life for longer. I still had a lot of patterning on things, like all the little nuggets of where my work has grown were all there in that show.
Kat would like to know if you could talk more about the move away from glaze to the bare terracotta.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I'm actually thinking of using glaze again because I want to try out like white tones. But the terracotta, I just love how fleshy it is and how I can still put lots of motif and patterning onto the surface of things without glaze. Um, the particular color of it, I think, has gone well with a lot of the fiber that I've been pairing with it. And at first I was trying to glaze things and have fiber as well. But then I realized that the fiber itself could be a way that I could do all the things that the patterns that I wanted to do in the glaze, but I could do them in the fiber, so I didn't need it on the ceramic. Um, and also from a practical stance, some of the things I've made that have been bare terracotta would be very difficult to put glaze onto and have them fire, like things that would need to be glazed all the way around. It's not impossible, it just was impractical. Um, and it felt like sometimes I feel like glaze can be like a skin that's trapping the ceramic. I wanted the ceramic to be able to breathe and make it feel a little bit more vulnerable in the work.
So I'm curious, you live in spaces of ceramics and fiber adeptly bridging those
Mhm.
two, both of which are important materials within the craft movement. Can you talk a little bit about uh, when and how you became sincerely accomplice to that movement?
Um, yeah, I think about that a lot because opportunities for artists are usually one or the other. Like ceramic things can be, in my opinion, very exclusionary. I think there's so many opportunities that are really, really great for ceramic artists, and there's such a strong community. It's difficult to be a ceramic artist and also identify in another material. It's only been recently that I've actually shown in ceramic shows. Or have been included in ceramic like residencies. Last summer, I co-facilitated a residency at Watershed Center for the Ceramic Arts in Maine, with artist Emily Bayless, who's a ceramic artist in Texas. And our whole thing, we got to put together a cohort of artists who work in multiple materials. Like clay is important to them, but they might paint or they might make video or they might work in fiber or they're a painter who really wanted to explore maiolica and painting on clay's surface for the residency. So I see it as my agenda with my work to bridge things and make more paths possible. Um, like craft and the communities that come along with it are really awesome. And I want of them. I haven't actually done much with like the fiber community besides what I was brought up in with my grandmother's going to quilt shows and quilt guild meetings and things like the very hobbyist crew. But I find that like taking a step back from all of that, I can use these craft materials, but think of myself as a sculptor. And that seems to sit with me a little bit better. Like if I think about myself first as an artist, rather than a crafts person, but I do have a deep reverence for craft.
Excellent. We have a question from Drew. What is your philosophy in coming up with titles for your pieces?
So it changes. I like to put a little bit of humor in there. Sometimes it's just very observational, like green. Other times it's more narrative or implying a potential for narrative with the work. But like for this piece that's on the screen now, pockets and other places to hide. Um, I mean, that's in the title, right? It kind of explains what it is. There's a pocket and there's other places to hide. Um, I don't mind the titles getting kind of long in for my work. It was a playful title for sure.
Another question. You mentioned that you enjoy terracotta because of how nicely the color pairs with your work. I'm sure there are other reasons, but also, are there other clay bodies that you enjoy working with?
So I did work in stoneware quite a bit before, but I really like low fire. I'm a low fire girl. Um, yes, I like how it looks. I like working with it. I like its structural integrity for building large works, but also I can do really small things with it. There's a talk by Linda Arbuckle, who's a ceramic artist, called, I believe it's called the Terracotta Manifesto. And she goes into it saying that basically the gist I came away with is that working in terracotta is kind of a feminist thing because like 70s, 80s, a lot of clay dudes were working in higher fire ranges. I mean, it's very cool to do a wood firing, to fire to a high temperature, to do cone 10 reduction. All this stuff is really cool. It's very strong, but strong in a different way than terracotta. Terracotta is the bricks that we build with. And it can be just as strong. It's just a different kind of strength. Additionally, I wanted my process to be simpler. And working in low fire and terracotta has made my life easier. I'm able to fire in electric kilns, set it and forget it, fire it once. It's more expedient. I have less loss than if I worked at a higher temperature. And also, when I do put glaze onto things, the colors at low fire are brighter, and I have more methods to reach from. I lose less of that painted on information. I find with cone six or hotter, the things melt a little bit more. There's more of a phenomenology between the glaze and the ceramic. They become more embedded into one another. And low fire, the color that's placed onto the surface very much still feels a little bit separate from that. And I like that. It's like our clothing on top of our bodies.
Excellent. Also, so you chatted about your BFA. How about your MFA thesis? Are there like, what was the overarching concept or theme that you could distill down? Just because it's
Yeah.
clearly all linked.
Yeah, so the MFA thesis, which I did show, um, it was those large slab organic shapes, and then the bricks and the big upholstered piece. Um, I was thinking about feminism, and I was thinking about painting and ceramics and their relationship in art history, how it's gendered. I mean, it ties in all of my research, how pattern moved across time, how I was using it between materials. Um, Looking back at that work now, because it was several years ago, I often think that when we try to make big shows like that, that speak about everything we're thinking about, it can feel like there's a lot going on. And making bodies of work where you can have one or two themes that get played with across a series. I have more fun with that. I don't feel anymore like I need to speak about my entire body of interest. Even though it's all there, I don't feel like I need to check all of the boxes anymore.
Excellent. So I think I'll close out with this question um, because particularly in the sculpture, the craft, the ceramic, the fiber communities, um, there's such an openness for learning from each other. So I am curious if you wouldn't mind sharing with other folks that are either struggling through navigating having more than one um, material that they identify with. What is your suggestion to bridge the gap to a space where you feel confident in that and moving forward?
Yeah, so I think craft materials give us so much to learn and so many different ways of going about it. And like I always say that clay is something that I can try new things in with forever. There's so much to do. Um, I think in regards to combining things or having interest in multiples, I don't know. I just like say embrace seasonality. Like in the winter, I don't work with clay as much because everything's dry. I like to cozy up with fiber and work in that way. And in the summer, I feel like working with clay more and just kind of go with what suits interests in the moment. And then also experimentation. See what works. I didn't think that clay ceramic and fiber would go together until I tried it. And the first few times I tried it, they were duds. They were real awkward. And the more you try something, the better it's going to get. And you might invent something new.
Perfect. So thank you again, Brittany, for the generosity of your
Yeah.
time, your talent. And thank you all for joining us for this artist talk by Britny Wainwright as a part of our programming for In Touch. I'd like to give a special thank you to the curator, Megan Young, and a big thank you to all of the other participating artists, as well as the Ohio Arts Council's board, the Ohio legislature, and the governor who support the Ohio Arts Council, this great space, and of course, Ohio artists. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.